Some stories are stitched in comfort. Others are torn by betrayal, tested in silence, worn thin by waiting. But what God allows to be torn, He is also faithful to transform. Joseph, tested, torn, transformed.
Well, it's so good to have you here this morning. You survived the 4th of July and you're up early and here. Those of you online, thankful that you're with us, as well as our Skagit campus with us right now, and some very special guests here this morning. There are people that normally go on Saturday night that are here today. And be gracious to them. They don't know how this works. So just be very kind to them. It is good to have you with us here as we are going to our second week of this series on Joseph. And today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 37, pretty much going to cover the whole chapter, not word for word, but all the way through if you want to turn there. And we're going to learn some things from Joseph, another lesson. And there's 5 words that I want you to walk away with today. We're also going to look at a couple little quick lessons from his brothers, just kind of a little something you can throw in the back of your mind if you'd like. But when it comes to like lessons or getting advice, especially if we're going through difficult times, hardships, times when you're like questioning things, it's nice to hear from others. You know, what do they think, or what words do they have for us? And I had a couple of weeks ago, someone talked to me and they used kind of a metaphor that I really like. And he said, sometimes people give you armchair answers and sometimes they give you wheelchair answers. Armchair answers come from a place of comfort and ease, a place where a lot of theories and ideas and philosophies, sometimes cliches and platitudes, and they're quick, like someone who will tell you how to be a parent that's never raised children. But a wheelchair answer is someone who's been in the trenches, someone who knows about the mud and the blood and the hardships and some scars and some life and some stories and some years. So when we look at Joseph's life, and we try to learn from it, and we read words like this out of Genesis 37, verse 2. Joseph, a young man of 17, it would be really easy to assume we're probably going to get some armchair answers. It's a young man, he's 17. There are things he hasn't even experienced. He can't grow a full beard, buy a lotto ticket, or rent a car. What does he have to say to us? Not only that, but he comes from a very privileged, wealthy family, and not just a privileged, wealthy family. He comes from a family that God has made a covenant with, saying, I will bless this family so that the whole world will be blessed. Most of us can't say that. He comes from that, and not only that, but he's his father's favorite. He has had protection. He's been pampered a little bit. He's his favored one. And you would think, well, he's had kind of a silver spoon armchair existence. And while that is true, as we saw a little bit last week, and we will continue to see, even at this young age of 17, he's had some wheelchair experiences, and he will have more. I mean, he lost his mom when he was probably 13, had to move away from his grandfather, would never see him again, lost his other grandfather when he was probably, 14, 15 years old. So he'd had some things. And what we will find is this, because we looked at this last week, if you weren't here. Last week, we recognized that in the entire account of Joseph, nothing bad is ever said about him. That there's no lapse of judgment. There's no moral failure. There's no black eye. There's no stain on his record. And even at 17, we can learn this lesson from him. And the lesson that we learn is living a godly life in a godless setting. Because all through, not just when he's 17, but we'll see all throughout the rest of this summer, that he always maintains his integrity. He always holds true to his values, to his convictions, and in every circumstance, in every situation, he strives to honor God. That's a pretty good lesson to learn, even if it's from a 17-year-old, especially if it's from a 17-year-old. And it's not just the godless setting of, as we'll get to, in prison or in Egypt. We'll talk about that in the weeks to come. But even in his family. You said, but I thought you said that God had made a covenant with his family. Yes, he did. But as we saw last week, the patriarchs, they all had bad chapters in their life. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of them. And then he's got these older brothers. Some of them really probably 15 to 20 years older than him. And I don't know if you've ever had multiple children and a younger child that's innocent, and you kind of want to keep them away from the older siblings, because the older siblings, they know things, they say things, they've got words, and you kind of just want to protect that one. I mean, young Joseph, like his oldest brother, Reuben, we looked at it briefly. Reuben slept with his dad's concubine. Not a good example. Brothers number 2 and 3, Levi and Simeon, went into a town called Shechem to defend their sister's honor because she had been violated. They act like marauders. They slay all of the men and they loot and pillage the whole village. Brother number 4, Judah. We'll skip chapter 38. You can read it on your own. Not because we're afraid of it, but because it really doesn't just straight pertain to Joseph. Genesis 38, Judah sleeps with a woman that he thinks is a prostitute, ends up it's his daughter-in-law. She conceives twins. I mean, these are his brothers. Like, this is family situation, is a very ungodly family, and yet he maintains his integrity, his character. He continues to walk a straight and narrow pathway. And then you have these brothers. We looked at this last week in Genesis 37, 3 and 4. Now Israel, his dad, loved Joseph more than any of the other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. We looked at this briefly last week. But there's this sibling rivalry. There's this jealousy. There's this hatred. There's these cruel words. Anytime they speak to Joseph, they're not able to say a kind word. It's just always derogatory. It's always putting him down. It's always just slandering him or defaming him or whatever it might be, just belittling him all the time. And this is going on. What makes matters worse is when we get to verse 5, and it says this: Joseph had a dream. Joseph had a dream. Now, most of us, when we think Joseph, we think the coat of colors, but we also think of the dream. In fact, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical that I've referenced, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which little full disclosure, the drama started in like the early 70s. The movie was in 1999. I never saw either until preparing for this sermon. I finally watched it and I was like, that's kind of fun. Anyway, that's a little side note. But it's about this dream. Now, it originally aired on a stage in 73. Some of us were from that era. The best of times, the worst of times. The decade of dreams, 1973 to 1983. We could have lived our own musical. Because it was, you think about this. 1973, Aerosmith comes out with Dream On. 1973, dude, do you realize how, there it was. Sing with me, sing for the years, sing with the laughter, sing for the tears. Maybe the good Lord tomorrow will take you away. Dream on. And I can't go to the high notes. That's 1973. 1974, Supertramp comes out with Dreamer. You ain't nothing but a dreamer. You can put your hand in your head. Oh, no. Okay, well, I won't sing that one either. 1975, Gary Wright comes out with a song called Dreamweaver. Anyone? I just closed my eyes again. Jumped aboard the Dreamweaver train. Take me away, all that. Dreamweaver, I believe it. I won't sing that one either. Then there's a little hiatus, but the year I graduated from high school, Hall & Oates came out, You Make My Dreams Come True. Okay, I won't sing that one either. 2 years later, in 1983, then you have the Eurythmics singing, Sweet dreams are made of this. So our whole decade were these songs. We lived a musical. They're all about these dreams. 2 decades before the Eurythmics sang that, a decade before Aerosmith sang that, there was a more serious one. August 28, 1963. In front of 250,000 people, a march on Washington for jobs and freedom. The Reverend Martin Luther King gets up to give a short little speech. But just as he's preparing to go back to his chair, the gospel singer, Mahalia Jackson, screams out, Tell him about your dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream. And he gives this iconic I Have a Dream speech. that became a defining moment in the civil rights movement. Now, today we're going to see that Joseph has a dream, and he tells about the dream, and it becomes a defining moment in his life and in this story. Back to verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more, as if they needed another reason to hate him. He tells them this dream of how he had this dream that they were all out in the field and they were binding up these sheaves, and suddenly all their sheaves bowed down. His sheaf, it raised up, and they were all bowed down to him. And he tells them this story. Verse 8, it says, his brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream and told it to his brothers. Dude, just don't tell him. He has another dream. This time it has the sun and the moon and 11 stars, and they're all bowing down to him. His dad gets involved. Jacob comes along and says, he rebukes him. Now these dreams and him telling them, there are three ways to kind of interpret what's going on with Joseph on this. Because some of you say, well, Bob, you said there was never anything bad said about him. I'm going with that one. Okay. Let's walk through these three different scenarios. Maybe this does show a character flaw with Joseph. Maybe this is a 17-year-old who's tired of being picked on by his older brothers, sick and tired of always being belittled, always being put down, and finally he's got something and he's going to get even. Maybe. But that's so out of character for the rest of the story of his life. Here's a second scenario. Maybe he's a naive 17-year-old, not real street smart. He has these dreams. It doesn't say that he necessarily knows what they mean. Later, he'll be able to interpret some dreams. God will give him that ability on a few occasions. But maybe, let's just give him the benefit of the doubt here. Maybe he's just super naive, and he goes, guys, I had this dream. I don't have a clue what it means. You guys got any ideas? Or third, and this is one I'm going to hold on to, what if he's not trying to get even? What if he's not naive? What if he recognizes these dreams are from God? And when God gives something like to a prophet, it was for the purpose of passing that on, to be shared as a warning, as a directive, as a guide. And what if when Joseph shares these dreams, he's not being rebellious, he's being responsible? What if he's not trying to be obnoxious? He's just trying to be obedient to his heavenly Father, that God had given him these messages that he is supposed to pass on. That he does this, and he shares this with his brothers. Verse 11, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Like, his father rebuked him, but he's like, I wonder what that might have been about. Because his father had had some dreams too. His father had been to a place called Bethel and set up a stone for a pillow, and that night he had a dream about this ladder, this stairway going to heaven, and these angels ascending and descending on it. So he said, I know that these things happen. His father had a dream about these goats that were speckled and spotted and striped, and it was like God providing. And so Jacob keeps these things in mind. It reminds me of in Luke chapter 2, when these things happen about the birth of Jesus, and it says that Mary treasured these things and pondered them in her heart. God, what are you doing here? What kind of message are you sending to us? What are you up to here? Now, I said we're going to learn a couple quick lessons from the brothers. Here's one of the quick ones on this. So they hear these dreams. They hate him all the more. The question I have to, ask myself when I learn from these brothers is, when I'm confronted with something that I'm not real excited about, am I receptive or defensive? If someone comes to me with something and says, hey, I noticed this, or I need to point this out, and especially if the person, the messenger, isn't one that I feel like I need to receive this from, my spouse, for instance, or a kid or a parent or a coworker or whatever, am I open to say, you know what? I may not fully agree, but let me just listen. Maybe there's some truth here. Real quick, I had this happen a couple weeks ago here in this room, right over here. After a sermon, a young man came up to me, he and his friend. I'd never seen them before. They said, hey, we don't go to church here. It's our first time. And we're just going around Whatcom County checking out churches. And I said, hey, there are a lot of really great churches in Whatcom County. So we're just trying to figure out where churches stand. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Like, okay, that's fine. And he had a very clear directive that he was going on, had some very clear questions, some theological things, some areas where we wouldn't line up. I wouldn't line up with him. And he had some very specific scriptures. And he was just kind of coming at me with this stuff after a service. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. So he's going after that. And at the end of it all, he said, and there was something you said in your sermon I want to tell you never say again in your life. I will throw one other thing in. He did preface that by saying, I've never been a pastor, and I am 17 years old. And my response bothers me more than what he said. I went home, I said, Doreen, here's what happened, and it's real, I'm troubled. Not about what he said, I don't agree with him what he said. I'm troubled with how I responded. When we're confronted with something, are we receptive? Are we defensive? Okay, got that off my chest. Let's move on. Let's get back to the story. All right, verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Question, who's not grazing the flocks near Shechem? Joseph's not. All the brothers are working hard. Joseph isn't. Remember we talked about that long-sleeved, full-length robe, that maybe that wasn't built for someone who would work in the fields. Maybe this is part of the deal that he doesn't have to go out there. You say, well, but he's young. Yeah, that only works so far because right after this it says, come, I am going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. It's not a young thing. He's going on his own over there. And he goes to Shechem, and there his brothers are. Verse 18, but they saw him in the distance. How do you think they knew it was him in the distance? A little neon robe flashing, here I come. They saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Whoa, serious? I get being angry. I get the hatred, not being able to say, but as the kids would say today, bruh, you're plotting to kill him. Here's the second little lesson we can learn from these brothers, that the root of bitterness leads to a shoot which produces a fruit. The root of bitterness will produce this shoot of bitterness, which if we let it go on, will produce a fruit of bitterness. And this is what's happened to them. They've just kept stewing over this. They've been nursing it. They've been rehearsing it. They've been living with this. They kind of dealing with this. And we need to learn from that. That's why in Hebrews chapter 12, it says, make every effort to live in peace with everybody. And then it would say this, verse 15 of Hebrews 12, see to it that no one misses the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Another lesson we can learn from the brothers of what not to do. Of those things that cause bitterness. Can we deal with those? Can we surrender those things? Can we submit those things? Can we release those things and move on? Back to the story. Verse 21. When Reuben, talked about Reuben last week. When Reuben heard this, that they're going to kill him, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. Reuben, you remember Reuben last week? Reuben was the primogeniture. He was the firstborn. He was the one slated to inherit at least a double portion, but probably the whole thing. He was going to be the heir apparent, but he blew it. Like he disqualified himself from the primogeniture position because he slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine. You would think Reuben would be the first one to say, let's get rid of this guy because it looks like he's become the primogeniture role here. But maybe Reuben, being the firstborn, the oldest, still has a sense of responsibility. Or maybe Reuben's had a change of heart. Maybe we shouldn't always remember Reuben as the one who did the worst thing thinkable. And maybe he's repented with some remorse. He's not going to make another mistake. And maybe he recognizes the pain and the embarrassment that he's already caused his father. And he just says, I'm not going to do that to him again. So, we don't know what happens to Reuben, but it says this. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, and there was no water in it. And you can imagine Joseph screaming, hey guys, come on, it's not funny. Or maybe, I'm going to tell Dad. When Dad finds out about this, come on, you guys, get me out of here. Or maybe after a while, I was like, I promise I won't tell Dad. I'll bring a good report that you guys are doing great. Look at the heart of these brothers, verse 25. As they sat down to eat their meal, they're plotting to kill their brother. They decided to throw him in a cistern. He's begging and pleading with them. It's like, hey, you got any more of those fries? You guys hear something? Oh, yeah. Hey, dreamer, why don't you take a little nap down there and see if you get another dream? You see how that works out for you. You say, well, Bob, you're adding a lot of extra in there. Maybe, but maybe not. You fast forward 22 years. We'll get there in August. Fast forward 22 years. In Genesis chapter 42, it says this, the brothers, they said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. And that's why this distress has come upon us. They've lived with that for 22 years. Now they're having lunch. He's down there screaming, pleading for his life, and off in the distance they see this dust cloud coming across the horizon. And they realize it's a caravan. It's a caravan of Ishmaelites, which are kind of distant relatives of theirs. Their grandpa Isaac is his half-brother, but they don't really have any connection. But there's this caravan of Ishmaelites. Now, Reuben apparently is gone because in verse 26 it says Judah, that's brother number 4, the one who sleeps with his daughter-in-law, regardless. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. Listen, this story, if nothing else, shows you that your family is not nearly as messed up as it could be. I mean, even if you haven't spoke to a sibling in years, you probably didn't plan to kill that person or try to sell them on some market somewhere. Maybe you're thinking, well, they couldn't fetch up much. But you know what? Listen, you see the things they saw on Temu. Your sibling could go, but they're selling. They're selling. And then Judah, in this moment of great compassion and kindness, he says, verse 27, after all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. Oh, how gracious, how benevolent. Yeah, let's sell him instead. His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver. We won't go into all that, don't have time for that. That's not very much. They sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Many of us have been raised with the story of Joseph. Coat, dream, sold, Egypt. Just bam, 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 bam. Slow down here for a second. It's a caravan going from Dothan to Egypt. If they go via Maris, the way of the sea, it's about 250 miles. He's probably not going to be perched on a camel for 250 miles. He's probably not going to take up precious space on a cart for 250 miles. For 250 miles, He's probably going to be shackled to others that are going to be sold and walk for 250 miles to Egypt. So we just take him from, oh, they're having lunch. Now he's in Egypt and in Potiphar's house. Whoa, whoa, whoa. There's a whole lot going on here. Day after day under the blazing sun. Listen, when I think about that, like tomorrow, I'm going to drive 250 miles. Tomorrow I will, to go to In-N-Out Burger. I am, because I'm going to see my mom. That's the primary reason, Mom. But I'm going to drive 250 miles. I'm already dreading it because I have to go through Seattle, and there's a big World Cup game. It's going to be the hottest day of the week. There's going to be traffic, and I'm dreading it because it's going to take me 5 hours. Oh, wow. And I got the podcasts and music and air conditioning and all that going on. Joseph walks 250 miles, not to see his mom, not to get In-N-Out Burger, but to be sold. And he goes. You know, the psalmist writes these words in Psalm 105. Joseph, sold as a slave. They bruised his feet with shackles. His neck was put in irons, till what he foretold came to pass, till the word of the Lord proved him true. Now, some of you know the story, say, but is that talked about when he was in prison? Maybe, yes. But couldn't it also be talking about this journey to Egypt? These shackles that rub his ankles raw, and the sand and the sweat and the salt and the sun and the cracked lips and the parts, all of this going on. Joseph understood a wheelchair life. It wasn't all armchair for him. And so he goes. Now, the brothers are saying, well, what are we going to tell Dad? How are we going to get out of this? Verse 31. Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, we found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe. And he comes to the conclusion that they want him to. This is Joseph's robe. He must have been devoured by wild animals. And he is thrown into a season of grief like nothing he's ever experienced before. Remember, his whole life, this Jacob, all of his sons are a disappointment to him. The one woman that he loved, that he gave his life to, that he loved and shared years and decades with, has died in childbirth. The one son whom he loved more than any of the rest is now gone. And it's not just that. He was the only son he had that he could trust. He was the son that he was going to turn everything over to. He was the future of this family, and he's gone. He's lost his father, and he grieves, and he's unconsolable. And you can imagine not only the grief of the loss, but the guilt. Why did I send him? Why did I send him alone? Why did I send him out there to be devoured by these animals? Maybe the anger that he has at himself, that he would do this. Maybe the anger that is misdirected to the sons because they actually need to be checked up on. They're unreliable. Maybe even anger at God or the world or whatever forces make these things happen. And he grieves, and the guilt and the anger. Now, last week we talked about the unseen hand of God, the providential hand of God, the sovereign hand of God at work all through this story. And at the end of the chapter, we see it yet again. Verse 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. This was not random. This was not by chance. This is the providential hand of God continuing to be in control, orchestrating things all for his purposes. We'll get into that next week. Chapter 39. We're going to skip chapter 38. I already told you that. We'll get into that. But this is where we go. Now, here's where I want us to stop with this story. I want to see why this story is so important to us. And one of the primary reasons this story is so important to us is because many of us in the church, especially in America, have an armchair theology. Ease, comfort. Many will teach health, wealth, and prosperity, and oh, it sounds so good. And we come to this idea, this thought that as long as things are going great, as long as I'm healthy, as long as we got good reports, as long as we're getting more money and everything's up and to the right, that must be synonymous with God's favor, with God's presence, with God's blessing. And maybe we never have acquired a wheelchair theology, a sound biblical theology of suffering. And Jesus himself said in John 16:33, we looked at this year, in this world you will have troubles, but be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. If we have an armchair theology, then when we fall upon hard times, when there's difficult situations, when there's injustice, when we're mistreated, then we come to this false conclusion that God is absent and or angry. That this must be his punishment on me. I must have done something. He must have been holding on to this. This was back from that spring break. That was back from prom night. This was from that business deal. And that God's getting retribution here. And that's our theology. And that God is absent or he's angry and that he's forsaken me through all of this. And this is why this story of Joseph is so important. It's last week I mentioned that his story is only referenced 4 times in the New Testament, and about 3 of them are just little side deals. The one where the most time is given to Joseph's story is found in Acts chapter 7. Stephen, who's a godly man, is falsely accused. He's arrested. He's in front of the Sanhedrin. He's being tried, and he will become the first martyr. He will lose his life because of his faith in Jesus. It's a wheelchair theology. And when he's before the Sanhedrin, he says, give me a chance to speak. And he begins to tell all the Jewish history that will all culminate in Jesus. But when he gets to the part about Joseph in Acts chapter 7, verse 9, it says this, because the patriarchs were jealous of Joseph, they sold him as a slave into Egypt. That's what we just talked about. That's the story. But then he follows it up with these 5 words that I want you to get today. The 5 words that are key not only to Joseph's story, to Stephen's story, to our story. And they're 5 words that we will see again and again and again. We'll see them when he's in Potiphar's house. We'll see them when he's in prison. We'll see them again and again. And Stephen knows the story. And he throws them in that all these patriarchs were jealous of Joseph. They sold him into Egypt. These 5 words. But God was with him. Not absent, not angry. God was with him. See, we want to quickly jump to verse 10 of Acts 7. Verse 10 of Acts 7 says this, but God was with him and rescued him from all his troubles. Yes, that's true. We want to jump right into the armchair, leave the wheelchair behind. Do you know that between Acts chapter 7 verse 9 and Acts chapter 7 verse 10, there's a 13-year gap in this story? 13 years. And for 13 years, God was with him. When he experienced all this ridicule and belittling from his brother, the cruelty of his brothers, it happened, it was reality. But God was with him. When he was stripped of his robe, they took it, but God was with him. They threw him in the cistern. He begged and pleaded for his life. But God was with him. They sold him to the Ishmaelites, to the caravan. Shackles around his ankles, walking for 250 miles, weeks. But God was with him. On the auction block in Egypt, people bidding for him, but God was with him. Sold into Potiphar's house, falsely accused, but God was with him. Arrested, forgotten, forsaken in a foreign country. But God was with him. That's the reality of the wheelchair. There's not always going to be comfort and ease. But the truth is this: God was with him. And we see from Joseph's life something that's true for every single one of us. There are two things that can never be taken away from us. Two things can never be taken from us: our character and God's presence. No one can take those from you. No one. No circumstance can take those things from you. No situation can take those things from you. And all of it. In Joseph being maligned and falsely accused of being mistreated and abused, and the injustice, the defamation of his character, the loss of his reputation, but not his character. Forgotten, tested, tried, in all of it, he maintains his integrity because no one can take that from you. And the presence of God. But God was with him. Now, real quick, I'll tell you two other Josephs, real quick. One of the Josephs is Christmas Joseph, Mary's husband. That Joseph had a dream as well. Come back in December, I'll tell you the whole story. But in this dream, God gives him a message. And at the end of the message, it's talking about, you'll name him Jesus because he'll save his people from their sins. At the end of the message, we read this in Matthew 1:23. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son. They will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. You say, well, that's the prophecy of Isaiah. Yes, it was. And that's the fulfillment that Jesus would come in flesh. Yes, it is. But it's not just the prophecy fulfilled. It's a promise and a reality. And it's for us living in that promise and that reality. That it wasn't just God with us 2,000 years ago. It's God with us right now. God with us in the difficulties. God with us in the injustice. God with us in the pain. But God was with him. And God is with us. I'll tell you about one more Joseph, and then we'll be done. A guy named Joseph Scriven. You may have never heard of Joseph Scriven. Just want to read a portion of his story. He was born in 1819 in Banbridge in County Down, Northern Ireland, to a well-to-do family. Graduated from Trinity College in 1842. At the age of 25, he fell head and heels in love with a girl from his hometown. They were engaged to be married. On the evening before the wedding, she saddled a horse to go see him. As the horse crossed the bridge to his house, it bucked and sent her into the icy waters of the river below. He ran, calling her name, and plunged into the river, but it was too late. His bride was already dead the night before their wedding. Heartbroken, he set sail for Canada. He filled his days in Port Hope, cutting firewood for widows, giving away clothes, food, and money to the poor, earning him the nickname the Good Samaritan of Port Hope. 16 years later, he met a friend of a friend named Eliza Catherine Roche. Again, he fell in love. Again, he was engaged, and the date was set for the wedding. As unlikely and unthinkable as it sounds, shortly before the wedding, Eliza got sick with pneumonia and died that winter of 1860 before the wedding could take place. Joseph knew what it was like to suffer. But instead of letting circumstances dictate his attitude toward life, he looked to something beyond himself. His deep faith kept him looking upward and outward to a loving God and a life of service. His hope and joy in Jesus never left him. Then one day, Joseph received a letter from home. His mother was gravely ill, and at that point, Joseph was reduced to such meager means that he could not afford to return to visit her. Instead, he wrote her a poem. He called the poem, Pray Without Ceasing. It was a pure, simple, rhyming poem that encouraged her to trust in God. Many of you have heard that poem, but not by the name Pray Without Ceasing. This is the poem that he wrote to his mom. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear, all because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Are we weak and heavy laden, cumbered with a load of care? Precious Savior, still our refuge. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Do your friends despise, forsake you? Take it to the Lord in prayer. In his arms, he'll take and shield you. You will find your solace there. But God was with him. In Deuteronomy 31, verse 6, these great words, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. 5 words. But God was with him. 5 words. But God is with you. 5 words. But God is with me. Those last 5, would you say those out loud with me? But God is with me. Say it again. But God is with me. So no matter what you face this week, say these 5 words. But God is with me. Treated unjustly, but God is with me. Frustrated, but God is with me. Falsely accused, but God is with me. Wronged, but God is with me. Pain, but God is with me. Difficulties, but God is with me. To live in that reality. But God is with me. I pray that those words would be on our lips, in our hearts, and in our minds every day this week.